So thank you everyone for joining our November HR Finance Committee meeting. We are starting off with a guest presentation from the city of Duluth on an email that, or excuse me, a topic that we've all been getting lots of emails and have enthusiastic crowds regarding. So are you Cindy White?
Yes.
Cindy, thank you for joining us from the city of Duluth to talk us through the Safe Routes to School federal grant application. And we all have some printouts that will be available on board book. Thank you, Jackie. So I will turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm happy to be back in person. I haven't been here since 2017. In 2018, just a little bit of history, we applied for the same projects. I wasn't gonna really change much on the application. I would appreciate your support going forward so I can turn this in and hopefully we can get some money from MNDOT to do priority one is the Lincoln Park project that I have on the top of the handout. I don't need to spend a bunch of time with this. We're trying to improve the sidewalks and curb ramps so more kids will walk to school. That is why we're turning this in. On this project, there's a missing sidewalk segment just east of Atlantic in yellow. I put a nice white path in lieu of the footpath that is worn out through the woods there in its place. And that's in right away. There's also some amenities up at the top of the school that I applied for last time, like bike racks and such, maybe a couple benches, whatever is eligible. I didn't write the application yet, but I turned in the letter of intent to do so. I don't like last minute, that's why I'm here in November, because the applications are due in January, and I didn't really want to have you guys have to listen to me at Christmas week. So I was hoping that you guys would be available now. So that's the Lincoln Park one. Any questions on Lincoln Park? I'm gonna try to be as quick as possible.
Okay, I have a quick question. I know that from 4 years ago, door knocking in this neighborhood, that people who live there were really interested in some of these projects. So has there been community engagement and discussion so that they know that because I know part of their concern is increased car traffic, and so have we been communicating with them to say part of the reason we want to do this is to hopefully have foot traffic?
No, we haven't had any engagement since the 2018 SMITL that I did at that time.
Okay.
So to me, it's not controversial. It's helping everybody's property. I don't have a lot of time to do that engagement personally. I'm doing everything with the person of one, me.
Sure.
Coming to the meeting, doing the application. It sounds like an excuse, but it is. I just don't have time to hold a meeting to find out that everyone wants this. So no, I have not.
Okay, I guess maybe then I would agree with you that I don't think that it is controversial, and maybe this is a good opportunity for our communications teams between the city of Duluth and the school district to work together to say exactly what you just said. This is a really beneficial thing, and so that's great.
So one thing I didn't mention for the newer members, I don't really recognize any of you, it's a highly competitive process. Us turning this in doesn't guarantee a penny. So I don't get too excited until we get the grant. We get the grant, there will be public involvement to the, to you guys and to the neighborhood, letting them know that we're proud that we're getting this going. So I would look at that involvement on the back end to let people know it's coming. But until my experience in the past on these grants is people get excited and then they get angry because they thought we were doing it. They misunderstand and say we had a meeting, how come you didn't do it? And it's like, no, I told you we had to wait to get the money first. So
as a grant writer, I can completely empathize. and frequently a person of one, a department of one. I get it. Okay,
So
that's great.
anything on Lincoln Park, and I'll keep booking along quick. We have done some improvements since the last application. Those blue dots are new curb ramps that we put in since the last application, which I'm happy to say we fixed some of the roads and got some new curb ramps in. So we're chipping away at it. Hearing none, I'll go to the next, turn to the next page quick. Bayview, the request over there on Vinland is to put one of those rapid flashing beacons. That's similar to the one that's on 40th Avenue East at East High School. And try to do some curb extensions there to make the crossing distance shorter. That's a very common pedestrian improvement, so they're not in traffic as long. So that's what those pink lines are, showing that we'll extend the curb, make the the crossing distance a little shorter. Put the crosswalk over on the other side. Any questions on Bayview?
Where's Bayview?
I'm not familiar with
Bayview is
it.
across Proctor.
Bayview's down.
Proctor School District.
Might have to call them and let them know I'm still doing it. I did the same thing in 2018, I apologize. But anyway, you know what's going on. I'll get a hold of them. That's up in Vinland. Then the next one is over at Congdon. There's not a lot we can do at Congdon with the bulb outs, given that the buses have to make the turns at the corner. But we can sneak in one curb extension up in that northwest corner to help with that, and also get the curb ramps and the crosswalks up to better standard. There's curb ramps there, but they don't have the truncated domes on them. So that's Congdon. Any questions on Congdon?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've met fairly often with our Congdon parents, they're a group of concerned parents, and we've met with Tom Damaris, too, the project engineer for the city, and they were looking at three different things. One was potentially looking at piloting some speed zones, looking at working with the city on encouraging more snow removal along that area that is between the area where the parents would like the crosswalk and the actual crosswalk where it is. And then they were hoping for a pedestrian crosswalk, but we are unable to support two crosswalks. So we're still recommending that they use that one crosswalk. But one thing that I know that they were very interested in was something like a proposed like the rapid flashing beacon lights, and I know that was something that they really were hoping for as well. So when I look at the two, knowing that this has been on my radar a lot for Congdon, is there any chance that we could get a flashing beacon there?
And I appreciate you bring this up. It's not part of the application, but it is a concern for a lot of the parents at Congdon. We are hiring a consultant to do a pilot study to have a school speed zone, and we were gonna select Congdon because of the concern that the parents at that school brought on. When we get done with that study, then we'll be able to either support or not support an additional crosswalk so close in proximity to the existing signal. But we will work with, life safety on the snow removal. We'll see what happens with that study and, be in contact and bring those results back to the parents. So that, I'm glad you brought that up. It's not part of this because we don't have those answers fleshed out in time for this application.
Okay. Just thinking about that flashing light thing, they've been asking me about that before I actually came here. So I was just wondering if there's any, if Proctor gets one, is there a chance that we could get one for Congdon too?
Well, and Proctor doesn't have a signal within a block of, they don't have a signal at all on either end, so.
Thank you.
It's fair enough question.
Yep.
I have a couple questions too. I guess to piggyback on that, what is the total amount that will be asking for? Can you remind me?
So at Lincoln Park,
I'm sorry, I meant like the whole,
yeah,
oh,
I'm gonna answer. It's okay. The Lincoln Park one is the first page. That one, I'm asking for $293,046. And then all the other middle school, applications, I'm asking for $211,280. So all the other sheets except Lincoln Park, I'm requesting 211. And the maximum grant amount is 500,000. So by splitting them up, I felt that a better chance having the dollar amount lower because it's so competitive.
yeah, I found that backfires, but it certainly depends on the funder. I think, so can you talk us through then, I guess, how you decided on these projects? And, because I know that we have really active PTAs, and, so for example, the speed zone, designation, I know Lowell parents have been asking for that, and especially with the higher speed zone there. So can you talk about how you came to what you're asking for?
So just to make sure you guys understand, the speed zone review has nothing to do with this application.
No, I know that.
Okay. But it gets compatible into everything else. Given the limited amount of time and resources that we have, and given that I've applied for Lincoln twice, 2013, 2018, went through the hoops, applied for 2018 for the same schools, literally no one has contacted us about the schools except for Congdon in the last couple months in 3 years. To be efficient, I just am turning in the exact same thing. If we want to prioritize going forward, I'm happy to have that discussion. We talked about that in 2018 and then we never did anything about the school district sending me what you guys wanted. And unfortunately, with a lot of reasons, that didn't happen. So in order to make this deadline and a try for something, I went with what we've already approved last time. There's no rationale. When we grab the 2018 projects, they're based on the safe routes to school plans that were in effect for each school. So in 2017, we looked at what those improvements should be based on that plan, put some costs together. I had to update the cost for this year, and I'm just going forward with the work that we had already done.
Okay. So with MNDOT, what is their process around budget, asking for budget changes to budget or project plans? Like, are they pretty rigid? I'm just wondering, to Superintendent Magus's point, and I apologize if we dropped the ball. Well, I'll apologize. If we dropped the ball on communicating, I think maybe we can figure out, maybe that's something the intergovernmental committee can make sure to keep on their agendas. But I just want, so what has their flexibility in the past been? If we were to add, for example, want to add that flashing light, I know when our son was in kindergarten at Congdon, it's a precarious drop-off zone, so especially in the winter.
We're asking for a certain amount, and I'm sure there's wiggle room if we get a grant that we could drop one school to make up for the cost if it was determined that that's what the recommendation at that school is. And this is why I don't have those public meetings.
And we're not
We're
trying to be
talking
difficult.
about scenarios that didn't
I'm
happen
just
yet.
thinking, and not trying to be difficult, but like we did meet with the project engineer for the city, and the mayor had asked me to meet with her or meet with him about it based on parent concerns, and so I didn't realize that the different entities weren't speaking to one or the other or communicating. I thought that if we were working with the city, it was going to be more connected, but that's not by fault of you or anybody else. I appreciate the safe routes work that's being done, but I do think that if we are able to have some flexibility afterwards, maybe we're looking a little bit at, I know that Lowell and Condon are probably the two that I hear the most about as far as safety, and Mr. Spooner is from his facilities perspective. Those are two we hear a lot about, but I don't know if it's more vocal or whether it's full need assessment too, right?
We do hear a lot about the sites, but if you don't have a child there and you look at the actual data, those aren't the critical sites that have need. The city has them prioritized correctly. If I were to look at it from a pure need standpoint, I know parents don't want to hear that, but that's the truth in the studies that Cindy and others have done. Do you agree, Cindy?
Well, I appreciate the nice words, and I don't want to come here and offend anyone in this room, because you guys weren't here when I was here in 2018,
Right.
so, and then COVID hit, and the state decides when they're gonna throw the money at us, and we have to react quick.
Yeah.
So, that's all I'm doing. There's really nothing else to this application. Just trying to pick up where we left off and get something turned in so we can make some improvements.
Much appreciated. I just want to make sure that when questions are asked of us, that we're able to respond to the why, and that we can also look to the future for other opportunities. And I am appreciative that the city is taking on that pilot project for speed zones. I think that that's a good move in the right direction for our city.
Steve Larson.
Yeah, I just wanted to share too, to echo what Mr. Spooner said. We did actually meet after having a collective meeting with some different stakeholders to talk about hopefully looking at that consultation process, and to kind of walk through, and did reconfirm the priorities, which was why as a facilities team, we have had connection with the city just in relationship to what the priority systems were. We certainly know there's been feedback and dialogue, but that's maybe one piece that hadn't been fleshed out because we were waiting for the process to happen before we could report back. So I just wanted you to know there has been some communication. So appreciate that, Cindy.
We have had ongoing communication, but without an application to turn in, we could have done better, but everyone's busy. That's the only excuse I guess I could say.
Yeah,
But
no.
I'm just glad you're having me now, and we can think about this stuff going forward and have more communication.
Yeah, and I actually, as somebody who writes grants, 2 months is like, my board is thrilled if I come to them a month ahead of time with the ideas, which is, I know that it seems like we're talking hypotheticals if I'm asking about budget rebudgeting, but I think those are questions that I would like to ask. So, thinking about how we talk about this, and this is jumping a little bit at the board meeting next week, I would like to have more of that. If that was really helpful, David, when you shared about the data around, and I should have gone back and looked at the safe routes to school data that I have in archives somewhere. So if you could resend that, so we can maybe set up this conversation a little bit differently at the board meeting when I do a synopsis, because I think that you're underselling yourself and the great work that you've done.
I'm trying to be quick. To me, it's really routine. To you guys, you're really interested. So I'm not in the same realm as what you guys are in.
Well, hopefully you're interested, but
Well, I'm
I think-
interested, but I just think it's kind of more cut and dry on my part. Like, we're doing this, it's a good idea. Let's go.
all right. Anything else on the content piece? I do think we have opportunities, David, on the intergovernmental committee to maybe, we're talking roads and infrastructure with the new build at New Central High School. I think we can maybe be a little bit more intentional about those conversations moving forward. Okay, Laura Mack.
Big. This one's got quite a bit. There's a lot of intersections there, and I think a lot of kids walk. So I just have a lot of those curb extensions to shorten that crossing distance. This is probably the biggest one with the most improvements. If you look at the top of the curb, that whole says existing curb ramp, you can see where I draw in red. I want to bring all that down so that people aren't walking in that sea of pavement. That's the highlights on this one. Any questions on Lower Mac?
Is there anything on, with Central Avenue being kind of a main thoroughfare, and West Sixth Street too, is there anything by shortening that? I know there's like a lot of truck traffic, that if we bump that curb out, that, are there any
I don't think so.
Okay,
This
alright.
is stretching my memory from 3 years ago. But I went and worked through David's office specifically when we had some of these programs and we determined where I couldn't do this.
Got it.
So
Perfect.
I would say no, and if and when we get money during the design, that's when the public and the DTA and David will be involved on making sure I don't build something that doesn't work for large vehicles, which I appreciate that comment, because it is a problem. Okay, floor back, done. Piedmont's pretty good too. There's 2 pages, go to the next page, it's like the inset. Shows you the last page there. This one has a lot of parking lanes and it's busy with the milk house, and I love to work with them on their driveways and their openings, which is always a challenge. But I'm doing the same concept on this one with, if you look at the bottom of the page, that whole sea of pavement. Pull that in and then pull out sidewalk in front of the milk house there so that the crossing distance is much shorter. So that's the goal on that one. That'll be quite expensive with all that concrete pavement, but that's why we're applying for this grant. That's that one. Any other questions on these? I only have 2 comments left if you don't have questions on the project.
Go for it.
Okay, I had 2 things I wrote down to make sure that I said. One, good news, the state is sending up MMB commissioners like Minnesota, the Management and Budget Office from the Governor's Office, to look at a Safe Routes to School project. And they're gonna look at Lincoln Park. And we're gonna meet on November 19th, down probably at Atlantic and Devonshire. What I'm asking you guys, and I was gonna ask either David or Mr. Magnus to send out the word that they're coming and let me know who wants to go, so I can dial it in exactly where we're meeting, so we invite you guys as appropriately if you want to attend. So I'll leave my card. Once I know what's going on, then let us know. That's just next Friday.
This
Communicate with David.
coming Friday or?
The
Next
19th.
Friday, the 19th. So that's a good opportunity to showcase our need in Duluth to that group. So I figured you guys probably want to send somebody. I'll be going, and then Phil Jens from our mayor's office is gonna go. And there's probably gonna be about 15 cars parked down there. It's a really short schedule. It's at 11:30, and it's not more than a half hour. Very quick. We'll just walk. I'll show them what I want to do, talk about the project, hand them the handout, and then go on our way. I need some practice on my marketing.
Can you use a clip when they say, "We fully support the safer route to school," and you can put that in quotations in the applications?
Well, that's why I have a certified resolution that I'm asking you guys.
Yep,
to put
yep.
forward. That's the goal of that. That's the one thing. The second thing, the next steps is the hardest, and I appreciate how much work this is. We have to mine all kinds of data on your students to turn in these applications, and I think Erica did it last time. I will communicate to David and letters of support from the principals. That takes so much effort for them to write those letters. We have the map. I'm gonna do a full court press to get those from everybody, and then getting all that data. And I know you might not have as much data from the year before because you didn't have people busing and walking. So we can use whatever data that we have on the most current year. But that, I don't wanna undersell how much effort that is for the school district staff, for them to turn it around during Christmas vacation. That's why I'm here, because it's really nice to have that done before they take their 2 weeks off. And I'm just kind of warning you that that's a lot of effort for them, and I hope it goes smoothly, and our application looks so much stronger when that effort is done also, besides the stuff that I have to do with the writing part. So that's all I had, and I'm excited to turn this in. We've waited many years to be able to do it again and try to apply for funding. And I think they're all good projects, and all the principals last time all supported them. And I look for your guys' support to move forward. I'm gonna put this on our city council agenda for our city, our next meeting, like, I think it's November 22nd. So I'm just trying to button this down, then I'll work on the text and then turn it in after New Year. But that's always a dead zone for 3 weeks, so that's why I'm kind of hyper about warning you guys that it's coming, and it comes on very fast. So with that, that's all I had, and I could stick around for any more questions, and then I'll bug out of here.
Any other questions?
When was the application due again?
They're due January 14th.
January 14th, thanks.
Great, thank you, Cindy, this
Thank
was
you.
helpful.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks for having me, I appreciate it.
Oh, you need to step in.
Yeah, just for a second.
Starring Holden. That transportation data is fascinating, and I think my first year on the board, I sat on the transportation committee and worked with a group. It was an equity group at Denfeld looking at busing, and we worked with a couple GIS professors from the University of Minnesota Duluth, who culled through, we had a data sharing agreement, they culled through all the de-identified student data. And it was absolutely fascinating to see how those routes work, but also to see the clusters of students and the walk versus busing routes, and really gave me, especially when you put the radius around the schools of where we can bus and where we can't, which means really different things in different parts of our community, especially in West Duluth. Because a mile around Lincoln Park Middle School is really different than a mile around, than Oregon East, for example. So maybe that's a good future meeting discussion topic. But I know it's a lot of data pulling work, so thank you to whomever on your staff, David, we'll have to work on this.
We'll definitely do our best.
Great. Hopefully, and then, with the passing of the infrastructure bill, who knows? Maybe we'll have, what will we joke about in Duluth if not for the roads? And with the climate change summit, we're not gonna go down that rabbit hole. All right. Moving on to department reports, starting with human resources and welcoming our new human resources director. Thank you so much for being here and welcome. This is your second week on the job.
Yes.
So thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you to go through the HR monthly department summary report, and then we'll have a secondary conversation about the Esther staffing, which I had requested that HR provide us with information on that tonight.
Okay, so first you'll see the staffing updates, new hires, retirements, resignations, and leave of absence requests. And then there's a breakout of all of that listed there as well. Departmental general updates, our benefits is currently working through open enrollment. This is for dental life and long-term disability and flex spending. And we also are offering vision coverage, hopefully if we have enough participants for 2022. It's also part of open enrollment. And they've also gone out to over 1,000 retirees. Gathering some data for the teachers' negotiations and the auditors. And then the HR department, of course, along with hiring and everything else they've been working through to do some recruiting with with the Zoo and the Go Show. We have some compliance things that are coming up here. The STARS report is due the end of November, the pay equity report also about that timeline, and then the EEO report due the end of the year. So these are all reports that we'll need to do to maintain compliance. And then the remainder there is just that Esther information that you have requested.
Great. So any questions on the, what was the booth? Do we have like a booth there to say we're hiring? That's awesome. That's really cool.
We're trying to.
We needed member Sandholm there in his wigs.
I have one question.
Oh,
What-
yeah.
What was the, or how did the vision coverage come about, do you know? It's new, since it's new.
It is new. Shanna Vessel, our new benefits coordinator, had Delta, who is our actual Delta Dental, is also providing a vision program now. And so it is, the process we're using right now is a no cost to the district, so employees who want to participate would be paying for the monthly premiums for that. And it's basically, you can get about 50% off if you use it and either purchase glasses or have an exam. So if you read through the process, what you pay in a yearly premium cost, you'll get about double back in usage if you were to buy eligible glasses or services. It does require, I believe, 28% participation by employees, so if we don't get enough people to participate, we won't be able to have the program. But it was popular in other districts, and I think in Simone's former district where she worked, they started this, and so we were excited that Shanna brought it forward. This was maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, and brought it to different teams for review, and it seemed like something to at least put out to our employees to see if they were interested.
I think it's great, and I'm guessing that the majority of vision costs are coming through FSAs at this point, and so vision is in the spotlight. Lots of big discussions around it with Medicare too. So really pleased. So thank you to Ms. Vessel for her work on that, and it's good timing with the contract negotiations. I had a question.
I have a quick question on that. Before you move on.
I wasn't moving on. I had a question too, but go ahead.
No, on the vision comment that CFO Erickson made, what is the percentage of our employees that opt into dental, and do you anticipate that we should be able to hit that 28% threshold?
Thank you, Member Sandholm, for the question. I don't have the percentage of dental in front of me right now. I'd be happy to look that up, but when talking with Shanna, she felt pretty confident that we'd get the 28% participation as long as we put information out there for folks so they understood it. So it's been shared with our employees.
Okay, thank you. And Member Trinka, I apologize.
No, that's okay. That's a really great question, Member Sandholm. My question is, I'm asking it again, just for maybe next month, if we can have kind of a better understanding of how many retirements we're anticipating. I know we had talked about that a couple months ago, and that was before the How to Retire 101 workshops started happening. I can't remember what they're called, Paul, but so that's just helpful for us, I think, as we consider staffing as a whole, for us to be able to anticipate that. And then I noticed in the full HR staffing report that's under the consent agenda that we had some resignations in some critical areas like food service and paraprofessionals. So I know that we talk about this every month, and so Teresa, welcome to the party. But just kind of curious if I was talking with our son about this yesterday, and he said that at Ordine, it takes kids like 20 minutes who get hot lunch to get through, and this is through no one's fault. We're having long conversations about supply chain management and their impact on local economies. So I understand, and, again, we, in the healthcare sector are really struggling with all sorts of kind of, comparable positions, but just curious, like, is it time for us to start exploring bonuses, retention bonuses, or?
Thank you for that great question. And I think what happens for us and what is happening with a lot of other organizations is the resignations that you see will get filled fairly quickly because those are our supervisor positions, and we'll have our other staff or our helpers work their way into those positions. So it's our entry-level staffing that causes us the greatest challenge, because those staff, we have a lot of internal moving around, and it's just those entry-level staff positions. We have been having some great conversations within our food service teams into how we could do similar things with our contracts to maybe make positions more desirable, making sure that people feel, and I know we've shared this before, food service is one of those challenging areas in which most of the positions are not full-time because they're only during part of the day. So we're looking at some creative ways to have some discussions on how we could maybe utilize those staff in different ways, where we could put those positions in a more favorable place so that they could become more attractive. Sheila Oak and her team, I will say this is, even pre-pandemic, we have had challenges in having fully staffed support departments, and those teams are amazing as far as utilization and moving to the buildings where we need them. We are in a little bit more of a critical place currently, but we see ourselves kind of getting closer to moving out if some of the ideas that are being worked on through human resources with Kate Elling and Sheila Oak, and in cooperation with some of the members from that bargaining unit, have already been having some conversations on how we can fix that. We look forward to sharing that with you.
Okay, and when do you think that will, I know it's an ongoing discussion, but.
I mean, I think it's ongoing right now. I'm not sure when we're gonna see resolution. There's a lot of other strings that are attached to some of these decisions, so
Sure.
they fit into a lot of different places, but I would hope that we could give you an update at our December school board meeting.
Okay, that would be great. Jackie, can we note that for our December agenda, an update on the staffing, desired staffing for food service and paraprofessionals specifically, and how those conversations are going with those groups? Thank you.
I think it might also be helpful for us to give an update on our work related to substitutes, because that's been a hot area that we're really trying to bolster, and I know that there'll be some continued efforts there too, so a variety of different ways to increase our substitutes in our system.
Paul can bring home all sorts of student teachers from Ireland.
I wish I could remember Trinket, but they actually have the same challenges and problems here.
Okay. So, let's see, then going back to the Esther, so I had reached out to the HR department and to the finance department and asked for an update as to where we were with Esther spending in general. So looking for a reminder of the Esther dollar budgets, and then where we were in spend down. But then kind of more specifically, thank you. And was this emailed to us too, Jackie?
It's going to be emailed to you. We just were pulling this up. This is part of a meeting that we're going to have on Friday.
That's right.
And so I just want to give you, this is actually information that the board approved in June.
Yes.
So this is the reminder piece. And then what I did add was a budget spent or budget encumbered column, so that we could just give you a brief overview of what we see as items in which we have already spent or are planning on spending, and then other items since June that may have not been yet filled or may have it going in a different direction. So I'm just going to highlight a few of those things here, so as I scroll down, those things make sense. So We had set aside the $200,000 for strategic planning and equity audit, additional potential boundary studies or other facilities issues. Several of those are ongoing right now. And then we also had kind of put in as an explanation that those may roll over into fiscal year 23. So that we're saying those are encumbered, that we do have plans on spending probably that entire amount of money on all these different program areas.
But we do not yet have a contract for the boundary study. We don't have a
We do
consultant
not.
identified for that one. I didn't think so. Okay, just making sure.
Yep. We had initially planned on hiring an HR director as an additional investment from a manager to a director. So that was actually from about a year ago. So we had put $40,000 in there to supplement that position. What's not yet in this budget is that we have also included hiring another manager. So we're going to need to add that second manager to this budget because that was an additional process that we're going through right now. So there is another Esther related HR hire in this process. Then we have the online time cards. So those we had to purchase tags for people to be able to clock in and out and utilize that system. We did have support for recruitment, which included frontline conversions and additional staff for business services. Those processes are ongoing right now. So we have consultants coming in to help with frontline. We have those new modules in frontline that we purchased this year, and then we're working between our HR and finance committees to kind of pull those things together. We have temporary elementary interventionists. We have approximately, I believe, 6.5 of the 900,000, but then we had other staff purchased outside of the original. The original plan was 1 FTE per elementary school. We didn't actually hire 1 FTE per elementary school, but then other supplemental staff, and we'll see that through the list that HR provided. We also had temporary secondary FTE. So these were staffing positions, including areas in music, CTE, and other places where, due to the pandemic, students were not able to do that while they were remote, and so we brought extra staff in to do smaller classes and to provide lessons, especially in the music area. So those were additional staff, and all of those we believe have been hired. The temporary district-wide floating subs, we had agreed on hiring 6 temporary floating subs, and those are in the process. I believe application process, but we have not hired any of those staff yet. So that's why you see a blank there. Eventually, we hope that that will get filled, but it'll be prorated since we didn't hire those at the start of the school year. We do have secondary MTSS strategies. There was $100,000 set aside. We have that encumbered, but it has not been implemented yet. So that's a work area that TLE is working on, and I think they have some initiatives in which they're going to be buying some things. So we did encumber it, but we have not yet seen expenditures there. One of our big ticket areas is the professional development investment. In our discussions, initially we had put $750,000 aside as a 2-year investment. And then when we looked at the overall need for professional development just for this fiscal year, for fiscal year 22, an additional $750,000 was added in the June overall budget. So there is $1.5 million set aside for professional development investment. That's also through our TLE programs and working district-wide. So it's not just for licensed teachers, it's professional development for every staff person, but it'll be housed through our TLE department. So they'll be deciding what the use of those funds are. Keeping in mind that most of these funds can carry over into fiscal year 23, but again, we'll want to hear more, and I think that's our initial plan for Friday, is to kind of come back together and say, what more specific things do we know about these things that we can provide to the board to say we have more definition on certain of these areas, and professional development will be one of those. Another one of our high ticket items is the blended learning support, which includes devices, staff, and infrastructure. We had initially budgeted just shy of $2 million or $1.99 million. We have purchased many more Chromebooks since the start of the year. The reason this budget is up to $2.2 million is that It was approved when we started school for another additional 1,100 Chromebooks that were not on our initial budget plan. So technically, this budget is over budget compared to what we initially had talked about. The technology devices, smart boards, those have just recently been ordered. So they will be coming in. These are for K2. So these would be the replacement of many of our K2 areas, because they don't have one-to-one devices, they have classroom sets in their areas. So we're very excited about being able to start putting those in to our systems. And then also with those, they needed replacement desktops, and that additional 400,000 is going for the desktops to complement the smart boards. And then just as a follow-up to the smart boards, not every smart board in our K2 throughout the district are non-functioning. We'll be pulling those out and using them for parts and replacement. So in other areas of the district where we still have the older model, but maybe seeing some clouding or seeing some other things, we'll be able to take those either projectors or bulbs or other things to be able to provide that information. So that's a good investment for us to make sure that we have those. We have the leadership TOSAs, or elementary deans. We did budget 700,000. It looks like as of right now we've hired 4 FTE. So I think initially we had thought there was going to be 7, and I'm not sure if that's going to be part of our Friday discussion, if those will get reallocated or if we're doing a reposting of some of those positions. So we have not seen the full.
Part of the challenge there is that we've had, sometimes when we're trying to hire a dean, we've had a hard time backfilling for the position that we're trying to take from. If I'm a math teacher and want to hire me as a dean, we have to make sure we have a math teacher first before we can release from that position. But I do have great confidence that as we do some additional work related to supporting in human resources and through Teresa's leadership, we'll be able to move forward to support that area as well.
In addition, we did also include the additional director. When we went with the new structure on the educational side, we hired an additional director of instruction. So we put that aside. It's a total package value of about $200,000. We did hire that position. We did hire secondary counselors in addition to some investments of sources of strength. I think folks, we've talked about that a couple times in the past several years. I believe all of the site counselors have been hired. I'm not 100% sure that there were any openings left, but I think when I had heard back from Director Larva that the secondary counselors had been hired. We did have $200,000 set aside for what we called social emotional supports, and you can see that there's $20,000 here encumbered. This was a project that was called Project Aware, which was a grant that we applied for and then received. So what we did was we had set aside $200,000 in case we didn't get the grant. We got the grant, so we only had to pay for our social emotional support people for 2 months because the grant starts in November. So we will have $180,000 of budget that can be redistributed, but knowing that we have a couple items on here that weren't on our original list, that's kind of already been spent in some other places. So, and then we had also agreed to buy the second step social emotional curriculum for $100,000. We have $85,000 set aside for support for transportation, food service, and some site monitors. We have been working on providing some supports in that area. We did actually lose our transportation clerical recently. So Steve's working on finding a replacement there. And then we're also using some of those dollars to help support with some of the recruitment in some of our areas in our department. So tagging back along with the conversations about how we can support our food service and transportation and facilities departments, we'll be utilizing those funds there. I am excited to note that we did hire a 14-hour per week clerical to help our facilities team. I don't know if any of you know Lori Smith-Tremble. She's the magic behind Dave Spooner. So if you love Dave Spooner, you're gonna love Lori. She has been working incredibly hard, especially with the addition of the sale of Historic Central and our new project on Central on the Hill and 3 new leases that we're working through. and our LTFM refunding program. So we were thrilled to get the opportunity to find a retired Duluth staff person who's going to be supporting our department there 14 hours per week. We had a $100,000 set aside for district attendance supports. At the time, and I just have it blank here, and it may have already been spent or allocated, but at the time when we were talking, I don't think there had been a consensus on what that is, but I think what I'm hearing from Assistant Superintendent Bonds is that there is a plan.
There is a plan.
Yeah. Additionally, we've had many conversations about providing some COVID support for Crystal Deal to get her a clerical position. That was not in our original budget plan, but that is something that we have encumbered that we are attempting to hire. So I do have a $45,000 encumbered, even though we did not have that in our original budget planning. It is a critical piece for us to continue to move forward. And then we have $850,000 set aside for building improvements. This was in order to support many of our traveling staff people and the increase in interventions. We were wanting to put some privacy rooms, or they're called them fishbowl rooms, in our media centers so that they could be closed off areas so that staff who are traveling would have a place to go in the interim where they're moving around from different buildings to different buildings. And with the increase of interventionists, many of our buildings don't have a place for some of our new staff to go, so we hired all these great people, deans of students and interventionists and innovation specialists, and we didn't really have places to go. These are very affordable ways to be putting spaces within our buildings. Our project manager who's working on our project volunteered to go around to every media center, talk with our principals to see how we could build those component pieces in. It's a great long-term investment in our building so that we could have some long-term support on that. So we plan on seeing that moving forward. And then the final line item is the Esther investment, where we had agreed as a school board and through our budget resolution that we would keep the same number of staff that we had in 2020, which rolled over into 2021, even though we don't really have as many students and we're not generating as much revenue as we've had in the past. So we have set aside up to $4 million to help cover the cost to keep our operational budget intact so we didn't have to do reductions. So that is a line item budget. And when we talked about ESSER in the big picture, this was one of the line items that rolls additionally into 2023 as well, so that if we do intend as a board and as a district to keep that level of staffing again next year and we don't recover all of our students, we do have some of this earmarked for 2023 as well. If we see a rebound and we see our operational budget improving, which we hope we may, then these dollars can be redirected for other purposes. But we wanted to make sure we kept this just in case we didn't see all of those things come through. So as you can see, the board had approved as part of our budget in June approximately $13.9 million. We have either spent or encumbered about $13.1 million of it so far. So there's either items, and we'll have to update this after Friday's meeting because we have now more information on that. So in the end, if we spend everything that we have in this budget, which the hiring of our floating substitutes and other people, we'll probably see this actually floating just over $14 million. Any questions, folks?
Yes.
And I would also like to point out that it's not listed here, maybe I missed it. We provided additional support for things that came up this year as students transition back. Certain sites such as Denville, we provide additional support there that's not identified necessarily here as well, such as the additional deans, the additional support positions. Those are not reflected here as well. So there will be changes because we made some additions as the year progressed.
I think those were covered and
we've been
shared, but maybe
we've been
not.
trying to meet since September 21st as a team to go over all these things, and we have a meeting scheduled for Friday now. And I think that's where we can find all of those additional things. So I just want to be clear that there are additional things that have been approved by administrators that aren't yet on this list.
Okay. So I have a few.
Just pointing out, I don't know how to do it. Member Sandholm has.
Thanks. I have a few questions and then we'll go to Member Sandholm. So I think I appreciate the initial stab at this. The numbers that are included here do not match what is included in this HR report. That includes just a couple pages of classrooms. So, for example, we've got 450,000 spent or encumbered for counselors, and I count 0.7 counselors on the HR report.
Yep. So one of the things that, you know, through our processes and through some of our transitions, we have several staff that are currently coded to non-ESSER codes. So the report that you're seeing through the HR department, they did a run of things of people and staff who are coded to ESSER. But what has happened with some of the folks is that they've been hired and they're using a site code without an ESSER budget code on it. So Simone and I have met a couple different times, and we just really need the help and partnership of human resources to help us figure out who's been hired and how we can get those. For example, the director is not, you would not find the director of instruction on this list, but we know that that person's supposed to be coded to ESSER. So we're neck deep in audit right now, so we've actually said by, you know, mid-December into January, we hope to have all of these corrected. So at this time, we know that there's been several miscodings and people moved forward into the wrong codes through the process of hiring, and so we hope to be able to correct all those.
Okay, and so, which gets at part of why that's a really perfect encapsulation of why I wanted this to be discussed tonight. You know, in working under the Health Resources and Services Administration with all sorts of our ARPA dollars, I have never seen CFOs freak out the way that they're freaking out right now. And these are CFOs who have been doing this for 40, 50, like the best in the business are freaking out right now because of exactly this example. And this is one example of thousands of opportunities for us to have missteps. And it's not a matter of if we get a deeper audit on this, it's when. And so I think that, I don't know how else to say this in meetings, but I think we really, as we look at how we're spending our money, we need to put some additional financial resources into the finance department. We have to. We have to, we have to, we have to. Like, this is just, I know it doesn't make us, we just have to. We cannot ask our current finance staff to continue doing all that they're currently doing, plus prepare for just the sheer volume of, and you know, I've seen what the reports look like for a $20 million clinic. I can't even imagine what it looks like, you know, whose ARPA dollars are an allocation of per patient revenue, blah, blah, blah. But kind of a similar formula. So I don't know if what we need, CFO Erickson, is for you to come next month to say, Sally, here's what I think I need. And I know it's really hard for you to say that you need help because you're so good at what you do. But I will say to you, like, what the last couple months I've been spending a lot more time at our clinic sites because I can. And I've never seen chief medical officers or CFOs freak out as much as I have in the last few weeks. And so I think as I prepare to hand over the mantle of the chair of the HR Finance Committee, that's one of the last things that I can do is to really stress to the board that we have to keep an eye on this and we have to support the finance department with what it is that they need to keep our I's dotted and T's crossed. And it is going to be so much easier to do it now and then do it right, as opposed to trying to do cleanup like on HR allocations 3 years later, let alone trying to figure out like who we're gonna keep on staff potentially if we have to let folks go. So I think what I can't directly ask you, but what I'll ask the superintendent to ask for is some sort of recommendation for what the finance department needs. And I'll say that even some of the auditing firms like Wipfli are freaking out. So, and auditing firms make errors too, especially with the kind of fly-by-night rules and regs that come along or didn't come along, or might be impacted retroactively for these dollars. And so I just want us to protect ourselves as much as we can and be smart, recognizing you have so much going on as it is.
First, let me say thank you for saying that. That really means a lot, and I know that this board has been so supportive, and especially you, Member Trinka, your advocation of our areas and our departments, this committee. We've advanced since I've arrived here because of our partnership, and I have valued it greatly and was really hoping you'd be here.
I still have one more month, but
But I really appreciate what you're sharing, and I think Superintendent Magus may share a little bit about some work that's being done to do some analysis on both our finance department and human resources department. But I would just really like to share how amazing Simone is. If I could just take a moment to share, and first of all, we all have a level of panic every day on a whole bunch of different things. But the one thing about school finance that we're in right now is that we do have some time, because of the structure of this grant in particular, to be through September of 2022, not September of 21. So we have a lot of time, you know, that we haven't just finished. So we have almost a whole nother year
Yes.
to make sure that we're allocating this correctly. And Simone has already been in preparation for the arrival of our new human resource director, because we can't actually do this as a finance team alone. We actually need human resource information and to team up, and I can share that several of the folks in human resources have pledged to support us in kind of having, we've already kind of thought about, this is gonna be a great team room for us for several days to kind of go through and make sure we have the people, we just have them maybe in the wrong slots right now. So we really appreciate the opportunity to do those things correctly, to walk through the pieces. But I will say that part of what has happened since the beginning of the year is there have been a lot of unexpected things that have happened and decisions that have been made, and they haven't all filtered through to a budget or haven't all filtered through to a process where the finance team can give an accurate accounting of what has happened, because there's just been a lot of moving pieces since the start of the school year. So in that respect, we are looking for that opportunity, and we needed this first meeting to bring our leaders together to say, okay, where are we? What are the things that we need to reshuffle? And like Assistant Superintendent Bond said, there have been some unexpected things that have happened since September that we haven't officially seen through the process, and we need to work with human resources to make sure we understand where those coding structures happened. And I'll pause for Simone.
Okay, thank you very much for your kind words. I just want to reassure you that our auditors are auditing the 5 finances, fin codes we call them, that we received in Esther money. Mm-hmm. It's called a federal single audit. So I've had to send in support for all expenses and revenues. So they do a single audit for our Esther funds. So
This is for 2021, which is last year. We didn't spend all that much, but we spent a pretty good chunk of CRF, ESSER 1, year 1.
Do you plan to do a single audit for 2022?
Well,
for the next 3 years?
They will every year, because it's gone over the $750,000 threshold.
Okay.
So they are doing a single audit on our 5 fin codes that of ESSER money we received for 2021. And again, we've had to send in, they've had to look at all of our documentation to support it.
Yep.
So it is something, and it gets sent to the Department of Ed too. We call it our UFARS upload, and they can identify it by the finance code and the object code. So, you know, for instance, a teacher finance code is paid with 140, and we have to support that. We have to show that we are paying a person with that object code. So, yes, it's a lot, and they are going to dig deep, but you know, they attempt to do it the right way. So I just want to reassure you that they are looking at it.
I'm really concerned about staff burnout, and I have been for a long time, and this is just one of the areas where we know they're going to be looking is an FTE allocation. And so that's, I'm really happy about like our new time card system. That could not come at a better time. But you know, in terms of the internal process, like documenting who's allocating what FTE to what, and then the supporting documentation that needs to sit underneath it, like there's a lot of stuff that goes into maybe 0.2 FTE of, you know, for someone. So
Yes.
I'm raising the alarm maybe before it needs to be raised, but I think it's really important that we be thinking about that. So, so this is, I'm asking for this prematurely then, so maybe we can have this discussion again in December. Because it's difficult when we get calls from families that say, we're supposed to have all this additional counseling support, and I can only point to 0.7 FTE here. But what I can say is, it's a coding error, and we will have hopefully updated information in December. Okay.
And if I could add.
Yeah, Superintendent Magus, and then Member Sandholm.
Oh, go ahead, and then Member Sandholm, go ahead. Or whichever way. So.
Well, thank you, Member Trinka and Superintendent Magus. This might be a question for you, or best for you, and it maybe ties into where we're going with this too, because I'm curious about how the stakeholder groups have had input into the spending of the ESSER money. And so could you outline or summarize how stakeholder groups have participated in this process?
Sure, and I can outline briefly, but when we did share, when we first came forward with the budget proposals, but as an impromptu quick sharing, we did we met with the DFT, we met with principal groups, generated lists, we put together a survey of all staff and families. We also, because we wanted to look at more qualitative data, we hired somebody from College of St. Scholastica to do qualitative interviews with some of our teachers. We also met with the tribe for tribal consultation, and in trying to get the surveys done to make sure that we were getting a broader input from the community than just your average survey. We also worked with our integration specialists and families and transition coordinators and others to try and make sure that we were getting those surveys and getting that input from those families. That's actually something that we've been asked about, to provide some additional documentation for the state as one of those alarm bell things that we want to make sure that we have done well. So those are a few areas that we've done, but I think it's pardon?
Can we see that
Sure,
too?
sure. I think too, we're starting to get requests for what's next too. I mean, I've talked to principals wanting additional floating subs. I've talked to social workers expressing the needs for things that are occurring. I think part of the challenge of having planned this in May was that we're planning for our perception of what our current reality in May was of where we would be now. And I think when we were putting together our operational plan, it was more focused on recovery. We still are focused on recovery, but we're also still in the pandemic. And so there were some additional needs, as well as thinking about, like as Mr. Bond said, there were some needs that we didn't know would emerge as strongly as they were, whether the behavioral needs at some of our schools, or thinking about some of the mental health needs that our staff are seeing, or thinking about the employee shortages that we've had. Those were things that we didn't necessarily forecast, and I don't think anybody forecasted as well as we could. So I think it's important for us, that's part of where we're at too, is taking stock of where are we with our current reality on Friday, but then too, we all have, pocket wish lists of things that we've heard from various entities. How are we going to engage in that next stage to make sure that we're able to really think about those next expenditures and do so in a way that's comprehensive and inclusive.
Well, I think making sure those pocket wish lists get filtered into some sort of clearinghouse so they can be overlapped with strategic planning and with other projects that are happening, so we don't end up with,
Playing favorites.
1,600 additional computers if we don't need them or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
And I would say, related to your assessment, Member Trinka, of the needs of the Human Resources and Finance Department, I would echo that as well. I think when we we're looking at doing the hiring for our new director. We wanted to also take some time to analyze the department and structure. And so we were doing some work with Terry Willems, who was providing some support for that in addition to examining the structures. And our finance department said, and I completely agree, we need that too because we're so interrelated and something that I saw the need for as well. So we do have some additional analysis and oversight being done by Ray Queener, who has worked with us with Teamworks, who also has served as a CFO and assistant superintendent for finance and other areas for quite some time, because I think it's important for us to have much input from the amazing people we have in place, and sometimes we need comparative analysis. If we're always used to making do with very little, if we can show that other districts of our size maybe have a little more support resource of FTE in certain areas, that can be helpful for us as well. And I'd say that I'd echo CFO Erickson's comments about Simone, and I mean this as a compliment. Sometimes you remind me of a duck because you're so smooth going across the surface, but you're paddling like hell underneath. And that's one thing that very much appreciates me, that I very much appreciate about the way that you work your tail off to get things done, yet you never give the impression of panic.
Thank you. Member Trinka, and these are all great. I'm just really valuing this conversation right now. And I think what's going to be really important as we move forward into the winter and into the spring is our strategic planning. Because as I'm looking at 2022, which is the fiscal year we're in right now, planning for fiscal year 23 and 24, September of 24 is our final days of when we can spend these dollars. Reality sets back in. And while I certainly appreciate all of the willingness to try to do more right now, I always have the underlying concern about, is this sustainable? And how do we continue to make this sustainable? And can we continue to have the opposite conversation of what other things are we going to adjust and what other things are we going to potentially pivot from to make sure if these are things we truly want to keep for a sustainable period of time. And I think for board members who have been a part of this district for a while or have even been staff members like Member Sandholm, I've looked at the financial history of this district since well before I arrived, and even the times during here, and it's a fun ride. If you look at the charts and the graphs, there's a lot of movement, both very positive and then sometimes some real big challenges. And so my messaging since I arrived here at Duluth Public Schools was, I want to do everything I can to make sure that the board, our administrative teams, our leaders can all feel confident that we have a sustainable budget to make decisions within. And so I very much appreciate the value of all that we're talking about, and even more look forward to several CFO for life after Esther. It is that component piece of how are we going to adjust, and Simone and I have this conversation weekly as we're putting in more budget codes, and our friends now in Human Resources who are going to be updating and doing more of that work too. It's going to have to be so critical that we're tracking this correctly, because the underpinnings of what this is going to bring about and how we continue to move forward afterwards. And I know we're going to be talking about enrollment here in just a minute as part of my education piece. That's going to tie in just perfectly into what impacts that has on our operational budget. So first of all, just thank you again.
You're welcome. I think that I was having this conversation with a former board member of mine yesterday, and this is kind of a really exciting time where we get to play in the sandbox with some dollars, but we have to be able to pivot away from something quickly so we can figure out what works while we can finance it. And so I wish that we could have the discussion around how are we tying metrics to whether or not, adding additional deans or whatever it is the route we want to take for how we're going to maintain staffing. But that'll be for the next board to decide. So I think that, going back to what what Jackie had up on the board there, I guess to be totally frank, I think the way that it's laid out is a little misleading, and I don't think you intend for it to be misleading.
Yep.
And so maybe what we can do is, after you meet on Friday, we can, like, I think having context underneath there for what the actual budget items are.
And we do have that.
Yes.
So I just, for a, can you see this now?
Yep.
Yep. We do want to provide that, but because we hadn't had our Friday
Yep.
meeting yet, I didn't want to
I get that.
preemptively.
Yep. So I think after that meeting happens, maybe we can make sure that what information sits underneath that, figure out how that can be best communicated. That would be great. Any questions on Esther or the HR or for our esteemed new HR director? All right. So the finance department report, we're starting off with finance education, and as we've all been hotly anticipating, November is the month when we, I think we got almost final numbers last month from, yep, so, but these are like final numbers.
Actually, these two pieces for our finance education are about our student mobility and the students who have moved around.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
Okay.
So, and then we're going to talk about in the enrollment report the numbers coming up. But Cattery Little, who is our Mars person, and I think some of you have met her, and if you haven't met her, she is the genius behind so many things in this district. But I had reached out to her, and she and I have talked a couple different times about how we can provide some information to the board, because there has been some questions about where are our students going. We know there's a group of students that live in our district lines, and then they have a process that we go through that we can identify when they leave us. So the first document that I'm going to share is called the Student Mobility by State Defined End Status 2021. So that's this one that you see up on the board. So if you can see that, it was in your, I believe it's in their red folders.
It's in the red folder, yes.
Yep. And it's also on board book now, so if you're following along in board book, it's also on board book. That's right. Remember, St. Home doesn't actually have a red folder alive and in person. But you can see that. So a little bit of history to give some sense of, and this is last fiscal year. So this is not this fall's numbers. These are last year's numbers, calendar year 21, which we were already in the pandemic. So if we kind of keep that in context, the pandemic started in March of 2020. We've started now the next school year of September of 2020 through June of 2021. So the numbers that I'm going to share mostly are the numbers in the white columns that are not grayed out. Those are numbers that are going to be valuable. The other numbers we are providing, and I'll give some context to those. But the very first column where you see total count, that is the total number of MARS records that happened in a school. And if you remember in our monthly reports, we always share that a student who enrolls in the district creates a MARS record. And then if a MARS situation changes, if they leave the district and come back, if they have a change in their status, many students can have multiple MARS records in 1 year. So we know as a school district that we have about, well, this past year we ended up with 7,800 ADM, but we had almost 13,000 individual MARS records throughout the year. So just to keep that first column in context, that's what that column is that throughout the year we had 1,300 pieces of information that told us about public school students coming to Duluth Public Schools. Any questions on that column? So at the start of the school year, that first enrollment, when we had a student who rolls over and now they've left us for whatever reason, those are going to be the next 5 columns. So we had last year 404 students leave to go to non-public. That is both homeschool and private school. So we had students who left our district. These were students who were at one time at the very beginning of the year considered enrolled either as a rollover or an active MARS record that left our district for non-public, which could include homeschool, and we'll see homeschool on a different, on our next report. Then we had 396 students choose to go to another Minnesota public school. So these are kids who were our kids at the beginning of the year, the very first when either those records rolled over or they were enrolled here and left. So this is not the students who, if they were at a charter school or another school district last year, they wouldn't show up here because they weren't here at the beginning of the year. Does that make sense? So these were just students who for a moment or for a few days or for a period of time were enrolled here in Duluth, but then for that first enrollment change, they actually left to go to another Minnesota public school. And we'll talk about those in more detail on the next resident report. Then we actually had 221 students since the beginning of the school year where we rolled over all the MARS records that indicated that they moved out of state. So we had over 221 students, their MARS file told us that they had moved out of state. Then we had 20 students that we had expected who might enroll in kindergarten, and then through a decision by the family decided to unenroll those students, and then will most likely have enrolled this fall. So a year ago in September, they were identified as someone who could be a student. They probably enrolled in their school and then decided not to go to school, so they dropped out as a kindergartner. Then we had approximately 109 students where we had rolled over their MARS file, we had them identified, but attempts to contact that student was unsuccessful and they never enrolled. So they never actually came to school, so they were considered unenrolled. Any questions on just giving you that mobility? So this would have been start of school year 2020, so last fall, like a year ago September. We're still in the pandemic, and these activities happened on that first roll.
So just to clarify,
Yep.
in that column to Minnesota, so of the 396 students that we lost to other Minnesota school districts,
Yep.
really it was like 200 because we're taking out all the academies and then the elsewhere component. I mean,
Yes,
that's a
so,
pretty significant percentage of the count is in that bottom.
yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna go all the way over to who was enrolled on the last day of school column. This is a number that in the last day of school, according to Cattery, it was June 10th. So if you think about June 10th, these were how many students were just a snapshot in time enrolled on the last day of school. The next column is how many students graduated. So you need to add those two together to determine what we would have had as enrolled students and graduated students. So they're not buried inside of there. So you add those two together to kind of get us to that number of how many students were enrolled on that day. Now that is not the ADM because we don't know, some of those students could have enrolled 5 days earlier and they're not generating us all kinds of money. This is just the snapshot of who was enrolled in the school that day. And then how many students graduated. So at the end of it all, we had 7,500 students enrolled on the last day of school, and then 574 students considered graduated. And those included students at our high schools, our online school, and then some of our residential facilities. Then, just as the gray area in the middle where you see mid-year enrollment changes, Cattery just wanted to share with you that these are students who would have different changes in their enrollment records throughout the year, but that did not affect overall ADM. It's just kind of giving you a snapshot of who moved around mid-year. And you can see that a lot of activity happens in the high schools, and then a lot of activity happens in our ALC seat-based program. So there's just a whole lot of enrollment changes because we see a lot of ins and outs in those areas. Many students are coming in for a very short period of time and leave, then they may come back, they may participate for a period of time, they may have a 15-day drop and come back on. So a lot of that activity is just to recognize that we have a lot of mobility throughout the year with our students. And you can see that They just have status changes, but they're still enrolled in the school. So we wanted to kind of share that piece with you. And then just a couple, we do have some students with homebound. The 15-day drop, just wanted to note that again. When students do not attend for 15 days in a row, their Myers file is dropped. They can start that very next day, but we basically lose 1 day of enrollment or time. And so throughout fiscal year 21, we had 207 15-day drops. So just wanted to share that information with you. So this is just statistical information that's going to lead into the conversation on the next report, but I wanted to just take a real quick pause to see if anyone has any questions on this mobility report.
This is fabulous. This is so great. I think this is the first time I remember seeing this at least. And so please extend our gratitude to Kateri for her work on this. I think that this and the subsequent document is going to give this board a level of understanding that we haven't had before, and is welcomed, very welcomed. So thank you so much. This is great.
I do want to say that Kateri and I were in a whole lot of nerd happiness as we walked through this together the other day. And, you know, I just want to thank members of the board, especially you, Member Trinka, who is interested in this information, because there's a lot of times where we nerd it out here at work because this is what we do, but to get the opportunity to share it with others and to have those aha moments and to see the look on your face just now, like, this is what brings us joy, this is what brings us happiness. So thank you for...
Well, I try to only ask for things that are relevant and meaningful, not all the nerdy stuff that I would love to look at, but thank you.
Yeah, so in complement to the 2021 information we just shared, Kateri actually pulled together a 5-year synopsis of kind of that mobility information in what it is now switching over to ADM. So I need us to all take a pause here, that because this comes from reports from the Department of Education, these are not head counts, these are going to be our total ADM. So now we're talking about, you know, 7,800 ADM might be 8,300 students in and out of our buildings throughout the year. So I just want us to keep that in context. We're actually looking at the recalculated amounts of how many kids were enrolled over a period of time. Does that make sense to everybody? So now the numbers are going to look a little bit lower than what you're seeing on the mobility report. So going back to 16-17, just as you can kind of see, resident ADM, and this is very common for most of our school districts here in northeastern Minnesota. Resident ADM, just as a definition, are the students who live in your district lines and going to any public school. So they could be going to another school district, they could be going to a charter school. These are not students who are enrolled in non-public schools. So if they don't have a MARS record, they're not included. So just wanting to keep that in context. And we often see resident ADM fairly stable. Resident ADM doesn't really move around a lot, but we see slow trends either in growth or in decline depending on where you are. As a region, and I've been working in school finance here in northeastern Minnesota for 21 years, and I would say we've probably seen an average decline of 1.5% to 2% over time, but we've actually had a few years where we've actually seen a little bit of bump up. But if you look at the trending over time, we just have less students here than we did 15 years ago. It's just the culture, it's just our region. People are having less children on many cases. And we're also seeing the economics of our area, where we are seeing that northeastern Minnesota is a place where adults without children move. So a lot of times we don't see that. But at the same time, we do see pockets of growth. When I supported the 31 districts around us, on any one year, we saw about half of the districts growing in enrollment and half of the districts declining in enrollment. So there were pockets each year, and it wasn't consistent. One year a district would grow, and the next year they'd decline. So lots of different things as far as activity goes. So, but what we want to make note of here is in 2021, we we broke the 10,000 student mark. We dropped below 10,000. And that is directly in correlation to the over 400 students who unenrolled for non-public schools because of the pandemic. So again, if you scroll way down to the bottom, you're gonna see the 1,100 students up from 1,031 for non-public, and the additional over 200 students who enrolled in homeschool compared to the 198 the year before. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of that report, and if I have it up here, way at the bottom, we just saw an increase of the number of students who, and then we did see in the mobility report that we did have over 200 students move out of state. So any questions on the resident ADM? So that is all students who could go to school within our district lines, but may not be. The next line is what we call residents served in district. So these are the actual residents of our district who are served in one of our resident schools. So we go from just shy of 10,000 to about 7,600 students actually living in our district lines and coming to our schools. Now this isn't the total number of students in our district because we actually get some kids from other districts to come here. So this is only the students who live within our circle, within our boundaries, who actually come to our school. This is a number that has been close to my heart for many years. I followed it for a lot of districts. I'm sorry, I'm nerding out at
It's your ticker tape.
When you see this number and you're doing an analysis of a school district, we have school districts in our region who have over 50% of their resident students going to another school district. And then we have other districts who have almost 100% of their students who live in their district lines going to their own school, and then also bringing in open enrollment students from other districts. So there is a wide range of information, and I think for each one of those individual school districts, it's really important for them to follow and understand why those things are happening. Oftentimes you'll see this number if you have charter schools within your district lines. There are some districts who don't have any competition per se, might be more isolated. They're going to have a high percentage of their resident students attending their resident district. So just wanting to keep that kind of in perspective to see what that number looks like. So for us, we have just over 75% of our students who live in our district lines attend our school district. Does that make sense for folks?
In 2016.
Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Up to just shy of 77% in 2021. So we've stayed fairly stable there in terms of the percentage, but we did see a drop in total number of resident students because of that. Now, we don't yet have the 21-22 numbers. We're still doing our fall MARS submissions, and Cadre hopes to share that with you either in December or January when we get that first rerun back from the MDE. So, but that's just wanting to kind of give you that sense of, you know, I always joke, you just think about a big string around the district of where our boundaries are, who lives there, and then how many kids are coming into our schools. Any questions on residents? Just wanted to make sure everybody okay? So then our next section is what we call open enrolled or our option students. So in Minnesota, students have the opportunity to open enroll to other public schools that include charter schools. So these would be students, our resident students, who are choosing to open enroll to other school districts or charter schools. So we have, back in 16-17, we had over close to 2,400 students open enrolling to other school districts, and approximately 99 or just shy of 100 students open enrolling online. Keeping in mind, these are ADM, not head count. So it could be more actual students if they're not fully enrolled for the whole year. So just kind of reminding that in context. It has stayed fairly stable, but we actually saw a reduction in the number of students who open enrolled in 2021 to other school districts, but we did see an increase of students who enrolled in online schools, and this would really be in direct relation to remote learning and elementary students choosing to use an online portal. So overall, but really if you look at from 20 to 21, it was really about 60 students. So it wasn't 150 new students, it was just 60 different students who chose another online platform rather than an online program someplace else. So we actually saw less students open enrolled, but we also saw less residents. So we don't know if some of the students who are our resident students who decided to do private or non-public or homeschool could have been an open enroller too, but now they've chosen to just drop off and do homeschooling. So we don't have that statistic, but just kind of keeping that in context. Cattery did pull the detail for open enrollment, so you can see how many ADM, and this is not every single, the report is actually about 4 pages long. We have one-off students in Minneapolis, we have students all over the state of Minnesota. She picked the highest percentage of districts or charter schools in which our students choose to enroll, and showed those comparison amounts so that you can take a look at those. So I'm just going to pause for a second for you to just kind of take a look at these different districts.
This is so cool.
This is a report that is provided by the Department of Education. They do look at the resident district out. We don't get a manual report that shows which students are coming into the district, but we can get it through a closed MARS file once the year is over. We can get which students from other districts came to us, but we won't be able to get that till January. So we will provide that information of the students. We do get kids who come into the district. I don't have that breakout of where they're coming from.
So when you're talking about, that's helpful to know, and I think that would be helpful for the board to have. But when you're talking about building these data sets though,
Mhm.
Kathy, you're including MDE data and our records data.
Our records that are submitted
To MDE and then come back to us.
They print a report and this is the
Got it.
report. Yep.
Okay, cool.
We just, so that you guys know, non-resident students who open enroll into our district is 172.
Can you say that one
ADM.
more time, please?
The number of option students who enroll into our district are 172.23 in this same fiscal year. So these would be students from other public schools coming into ISD 709. And again, I think we should be able to provide that information of where they're coming from back in January when the final MARS files are completed. One thing about Duluth Public Schools too is that because of our residential treatment facilities, we do have tuition students versus open enrollment students. So we have 5 residential facilities here in Duluth, and we then have to enroll those students by what we call tuition agreements, meaning the resident, so normally in open enrollment, the money follows the student. So we get a student from Hermantown, we get their money, we're super excited about it. When a tuition student happens, the resident district still gets the money for the student, and we have to send a bill to get the rest of the money back from that resident student. So that's just a process that the Department of Education has had longstanding. Because of the volatility of that student, they may only be here for 5 days, they may be for 30 days. So we have a tuition billing structure that has been very much advanced by the Department of Education, and a lot of it is done behind the scenes, especially if these students have IEPs. But if they do not have IEPs, we must bill directly with the other districts who are sending their students our way. So we have folks within our district that do that tuition billing for us. And for last year, we had ADM of about 132 students who were tuitioning in, most likely to our residential care treatment facilities. And that could equate to 500 kids because many of those students are here for a very short period of time.
And that's what I meant when I was talking about the student mobility
Yep.
data. I did not mean to insinuate that those students don't matter
Yep.
and that we don't want to track that. I just meant that about half of the volatility is accounted for
Correct.
potentially by that because we are rich in those resource offerings.
And then again, we already talked about it on the resident report, but at the very bottom, we share with you how many students who are residents of ours choose non-publics and have chosen homeschooling, and then that total non-public total amount. So we did see 231 students more compared to the year before utilize a non-public structure during the pandemic in fiscal year 21.
And do we have breakdowns for elementary versus high school for those? I'm just thinking with a couple of new elementary schools coming in, it might be
That's a
strategic for the board to monitor that and think about.
That is a great question. I think we can potentially get the non-public, I'll have to find out about the non-public, but we can certainly do a calculation on how the open enrollment breaks down from elementary to secondary. For example, we know that both the North Shore Community School and Edison schools are through 8th grade. So we know that they're not generating high school ADM, but Harbor City, which is also a charter school, is a secondary school, so they're only capturing those secondary students. We can look, and I'll ask Kadri if we can delineate that a little bit more to see how we can break those down from elementary to secondary.
It might just be helpful if we want to make sure we keep those students.
So just thank you for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about enrollment. This could be, just to share, and some of this has been a part of my history, I can do a 4-hour presentation on enrollment.
Easily.
So I'm trying to keep it condensed here, but as I shared earlier, this is the core of how we generate revenue as a school district. This is the core of how we get money, and being aware and understanding where our students are, understanding, the longer term trends, not just reacting to a year. For example, if you think of our charter school enrollment, it's actually declined a little bit, but that's probably in relation to our residents declining as well. But that's been a long-term trend. So we've already adjusted and planned our classrooms and class sizes. So, sometimes when I hear folks be alarmed at how many students might be open enrolling out of the district, and that we should get all those kids back, which would be great, but in our case, that would also require a lot more expenditure because we don't have a whole bunch of empty desks because we've already right-sized ourselves many years ago because we've seen the trend of some of these places. Now, with the pandemic, that was unexpected. And we committed to keeping our staff the way it was, even though we saw less students. And we're doing that again this year, but that's going to be a really important conversation as we move forward because we won't be able to sustain that for a long period of time. So I'll pause to see if anyone has any final questions on enrollment.
Paul, Member Sandholm?
Yes, thank you. And CFO, thank you very much for this. I agree, Member Trinka, this is really cool. I guess one of the things I take away from this or pick out right away is that our percentage of residents served has really been very consistent in that 76 to 77% range for a number of years. I don't know if we know what it was prior to 2016, 17. And it does look like, a good chunk of those homeschool kids from last year have come back to our schools, and that number's closer to what it has been historically, still a little higher. But is there any one, I guess where I'm going with this, is there any one takeaway or thing we've learned from this that might help us moving forward?
Thanks for that great question, Member Sandholm.
Go ahead.
I think the things I want to share is we're going to really watch the resident ADM total to see, like you said, we should now see that rebound if we have less students unenrolling in our district. So if we got some of those homeschool or non-public school students coming back, that resident amount should increase, and then our resident serves, we hope, will also increase. We're going to see the actual October counts when I do the enrollment report, which is the normal reports that Kadri provides. We're still under where we had hoped we'd be right now, so we have not recovered all of the students we had hoped we would recover by this time, but that's okay. We're going to adjust to that. Also, just want to make sure that folks are aware, this is public information, that fall of 2022, Stella Maris is doing a secondary non-public. I've actually spoken with them regarding transportation already for next year because of the rules and regulations. It sounds like it's gonna be a phased approach where they're gonna start with grades 9 and 10, then move to 11, 12. It's not, I think it's maybe gonna be less than 50 students, which doesn't mean that they're all coming from Duluth. They could be seeing enrollments from other districts as well, neighboring districts that may choose a non-public option, but I just want the board to be aware that that has been announced, and that we have had some conversations related to that. So, but in the end, as we continue to see that rebound, I think we just want to be thoughtful. When we look at our monthly enrollment reports, one of the things we do want to think about is the mobility, the actual physical mobility within our district lines. That is an area that I think we started that journey with the boundary study. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make any changes related to the information that we found out. But in order for us to address things like class size, to address things like building capacity, to address things like staffing, those are all component pieces of how are we using our buildings to their best efficiency. And so as we're looking at these numbers and as we're looking at where students are landing within our district, and as students are coming back, as Member Sandholm noted, as we're seeing students coming back, which are their home boundaries that they're coming back to, which may cause some of those issues that we've seen in the past where we've maybe had capacity issues or other things. So that, I hope the takeaway here is that this will maybe inspire us to again look at boundaries as a district and see those opportunities to best materialize our awesome staff and the capacities we have within our buildings.
Well, I also see this as being really important for strategic planning and moving forward in that direction. So, and hopefully we can all digest this and have further discussion with this great information. So, yes, I thank you.
I was just going to say that same thing, Member Sandholm, that increasing the percentage of residents served, maintaining or increasing the percentage of residents served would be a great multifaceted strategic objective for the board moving forward. So the question that I have, again, this is fascinating, I think layering it with other data sources like we had talked about, I believe it was last month, like census data and how that has changed over the course of the last 10 years or so. I think even indicating on timelines as we're looking at an environmental scan ahead of strategic planning, like when did Edison open, putting in the Stella Maris middle school and high school, putting in the when is Marshall Elementary opening, you know, like, so we're not being reactionary. So we're being thoughtful that we realize that there might be blips for a year or two as something new and shiny happens, and then they may come back to the district, and then trying to really understand why. So I think all of those data sources are important layers to consider as the board looks forward to strategic planning. The question that I have is for Assistant Superintendent Bonds. I think that you were going to at one point present us with information on the phone surveys that staff had done as to why families were leaving the district, and I think that information would be really helpful to layer in with this.
Okay, could you repeat what kind of survey?
We had discussed this. We've discussed it a couple times at this meeting as we've talked about why are students leaving the district and where are they going, and now we understand where they're going, but we still don't understand why they're going. And so you had talked about when families leave, and then I think during the pandemic too, when families disenrolled, you had talked about somebody on your team doing reaching out to those families and reaching out to those students to gather that information. So that would be so if you have that would be a qualitative analysis that we could layer on top of this quantitative analysis that I think would be really helpful for the board.
Yes, and some of that work did occur, and so I would have to circle back to follow up. So if give me until the next meeting, I'll make sure I'll circle back around and see where we are with that data.
That would be great. And if it's already there, which it sounds like it is, if we could have it actually ahead of Tuesday, if it's already there, then we can do a better kind of report out. That would be great. Thank you. Are we okay if we take like a 4-minute break? I need to go to the bathroom before we get, and I will not miss the facilities report. David, you're gonna have to do like a special education next month.
There's no way I can compete with Esther.
I got my nerdy happy place today, so I'm sorry.
Well, and then next month is exciting too.
Turn the duck right.
I know.
Can I bring in the yellow book that you used to do and show them? It's this thick.
That was like 3 minutes on the nose. Nice work, team. We will continue with the facilities department report. Mr. Spooner.
Thank you, Member Trinka, and as mentioned, I just can't compete with CFO Erickson. We just haven't had snow or sleet. It's been a relatively calm month, so a lot of work has been done, but it's been a good month. We currently have 134 work orders that have been completed, and there's 278 open. The historical Central High School move into the UHG, Harvig and Tech Village has been successful, and staff are getting settled at this time into the new spaces. My department, facilities management, we've split up, and we have staff in Garfield and here at UHG, and we are just completing our moves today and tomorrow, and staff will be working, and things are looking good. I think we're going to like where we're at. Our maintenance and operations staff are winterizing items, fields, stadiums, drinking fountains, things of that nature that are outside. With the cold weather that has arrived, under capital construction, the Congdon Park window replacement is finally, the windows are in production, and that will start in June once school is completed. Yordini's middle school door replacement, that's completed. And the punch list is next week. LTFM amended. Denfeld clock tower roof, north, east, south, and west repairs. We'll start again in May. We've wrapped that up for the winter. The grant funded projects, when I completed this document, I had 95% complete, but we're probably 99% on Myers Wilkins, Loramac, and Piedmont on the nature playscapes. PSS track, lane 1 ponding issue. CFO Erickson and I are working with legal representation. Currently, we're in discussions on that. And the historical central on the hill construction tasks, meetings are being conducted weekly or sometimes several times a week. And the print shop build out, print shop is staying in the facilities building. That is complete. The print shop is moved in, they're up and running. And I have to say that they are very happy with how it turned out. They really like their new space. They initially thought it might be too small, but once they get all the equipment in and the adjacencies of not having 3 separate rooms that they had at Historical Central, I think they're pretty excited, so I'm really happy with that.
Good.
Under building operations, the operations staff are doing an excellent job of keeping our sites safe for our students and staff. John Holden is back with us, a former supervisor of operations. He's back until the vacancy is filled. And we are actively working towards filling vacant maintenance and operations positions. Under health and safety, we did some abatement at Garfield. We had some tile that was asbestos containing. And Matt Johnson had his first labor management committee meeting of the 21-22 school year. And we had a fire marshal inspection at Lester Park Elementary. Minimal corrections were issued. And then the work comp activities are pretty self-explanatory. So I'll open it up for any questions at this point.
What is a punch list?
That's where the owner's rep, which is me, and the architect or the design professional, we meet with the contractor. And let's say this room is being renovated. We walk this entire room and we look for items that aren't done correctly, and the contractor has to complete the items before they get final payment.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Those doors, that happened faster than we thought, didn't it? That's great.
It's been several months. It's about the right amount of time for working with students in the building.
Yeah, but I think I remember maybe it was David asking about, can we do it in the winter? So that's great. Any questions? Member Sandholm?
Yep, thank you. Dave Spooner, thank you for your report. And I guess my first question is, are we or have you moved 100% out of the Central and Hill site?
The STC Annex building that facilities resided in, we've moved out about 80%, and we have moved in the print shop. We've completed the renovations that are going to be done over the next year to the facilities building, and the print shop is going to remain at that building during the duration of the district service center, the new transportation building, and the facilities renovation.
So they're gonna build around the print shop while they're in operation up there?
Correct.
Or work around them up there?
Correct. It can be done, and I've seen it done many times.
Okay.
We've done it
Okay.
before.
The Garfield site, is that suitable for your needs temporarily, or, I don't know, I guess I'm asking because I've heard some concerns about the Garfield site in the past.
It was a building that we had formerly had for sale, and obviously we have to keep it now. And I'd say over the past 4 to 6 months, we've been doing a lot of improvements. I am going to work with CFO Erickson to get it back into the LTFM plan. And there will be needs, roof, windows, the building exterior, or building envelope does need improvements. We have improved painting, bathrooms, flooring. I'd say it's actually a pretty decent building right now, although we do need to continue to improve it.
Okay, well, thank you, that's good to hear. So then do we have a long-term plan for the Garfield site after you move back out of that? Is that the plan?
Well, the building is still being used, even if we're not there, by our utility crew and all the vehicles and equipment that are associated with the
Okay.
utility function. And I think with the number of buildings we have and being pretty much right-sized, we won't have the loading dock at Historic Old Central. We won't have a big loading dock at the new DSC. So a lot of the activity that occurred at Historic Old Central will then shift to Garfield's. That building will be needed in the future. It'll be part of the district need.
Okay, yep, thank you for sharing that. Then it's good that we're putting money into it and taking care of it. Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, since Matt Johnson is under our facilities team, we have, Matt is participating in some of the new OSHA-related messaging. So he will be part of a team that's going to be working towards understanding the new required vaccinations and just the health and safety components of that. There are obviously several other components to that, which will be human resources, our health services teams, our building leaders, and others. But Matt is going to be attending some of the first OSHA FAQ provided webinars that are coming out. I think every organization that has more than 100 employees is getting this piece of information. So Matt was willing to volunteer to attend remotely some of these meetings so we can understand the health and safety related components of this, because there are just things from the masks and PPE requirements that we're going to have, also in relation to the actual working on that. And so we've been really appreciative of Matt kind of front loading the information for our facilities team.
Matt makes OSHA exciting. No.
He does.
But I know there's a lot of policy updates that are required as a part of these, or like policy and procedure updates that are required as a part of the new OSHA guidelines or requirements too, so never a dull moment. I guess this is on the consent agenda component, but since you touch on it here, David, how about and maybe CFO Erickson, the moves to the Arvig building and to the Tech Village? Do you want to just give an update as to where?
Sure. We are fully moved into our big building. This is the adult basic education team. There is still a little bit of work left, and I know Bart's not here tonight. They're doing just some high-speed internet connectivity there, which was the building owner doing that, and it needed to actually run through the alley of that building to get it up to the building. So we had been using Wi-Fi. They had connectivity, but the building owner needed a little bit of time to get that information together. Our new director for adult basic education has been in contact with us. She is doing a great job, and there's just been a few punch list items that they've been kind of working through just to make sure that the building owner, in connection with, so some of our facility staff have been supporting, but it's really mostly been technology things. We've been trying to get them up to speed, but she's doing really well, and so that piece is moving forward. ALC AEO to the Tech Village is in progress. They are there in temporary spaces right now. The build out has started. So there is still some work to do on cleaning up some of the final build out estimates and costs. There had been some changes that we didn't hear about right away through different contractors that are working with the A&L Properties team. So they're the ones doing the build out. We're not doing the build out. So there were just some changes that we're just finishing up there, and then they're in their temporary spaces, and then we'll be needing to move them again once the spaces are moved. But they've been creative. They've been doing a lot of work to make sure that they can find their spaces. Technology has been something that, again, with connectivity, because they're all in temporary spaces, we're using Wi-Fi and adapters and other things, and so we know there's been a few hiccups here and there, but we do have that connectivity available to them so that they're continuing to move forward. Both Assistant Superintendent Bonds, Secondary Director Larva, Superintendent Magus, myself, Dave Spooner, John Erickson, our architect, have all been working with that team to make sure we can try to provide as smooth of a transition as possible. So there's been a lot of communication and connection as we've been moving forward. So they are in Tech Village right now, and the build out is in progress.
So how far off timeline and off budget are we?
As far as the projected build out, the one, there were some technology things that A&L Properties did not agree were in the original build out. It's $29,000 difference than what we had originally anticipated. We are working with our architect and working with their electrician to see if we can do some cost sharing and use some of our existing structures that include server rolling panels, that we can put those in ourselves because we have one at Historic Central that we don't need anymore. They were just going to buy a new one. And since we're only going to be there temporarily, we wanted to make sure that we could do that. So there's been some value engineering that we're attempting to do there. But as far as the timeline, I believe we're on time. They have already started the build out. I believe it's a 90 to 120 day project.
Correct.
And so we've seen a few pictures that Nathan has sent as far as some of the demolition and some of the things that are happening there. So, and again, just a reminder, we did, through the recommendation of the ALC leadership team, we had received an option to utilize the Tech Village for 5 years. That would have given us a discounted rate over 5 years, because a longer lease, they usually give you a better yearly rate. Or we had proposed a 3-year lease with a 2-year out option, which would allow us to terminate the contract after 2 years, but have to pay the 3rd year of the build out cost. And so after a great discussion with the leadership team from ALC, they did not want to do the 5-year. They wanted to stay with the 2-year to 3-year. So that kind of changed up for both A&L Properties and us the amount of investment we wanted to do in a build out, since we're not really even going to be there 2 years. So they did do some adjustments to kind of keep those things. Had it been decided that that was going to be a long-term location, we probably would have looked at investing a little bit differently.
Any other questions for Mr. Spooner or CFO Erickson on the facilities? Dave, are we going to start getting like some sort of project updates with regards to the builds up on the hill once that starts happening?
That's a bit off, but CFO Erickson and I will have discussions on what we can provide. We can certainly do something.
We're kind of on hold right now,
Right.
so that's why we haven't actually been.
No, I get it. Yep.
Yep. So, but we also were. I just wanted to kind of follow up too with. And I'm not remembering if you remember Trinka. Mark Laverty was at our last school board
Mhm.
meeting, and we are hearing from them, and they will want to continue to provide updates to us, so we
Mhm.
wanna just make sure that you know that whether it comes through the committee of the whole or regular school board meeting, they're also willing to come to HR
Great.
Finance, so.
Great. I think there's exciting opportunities with the city too, as we read through some of their budget discussions around tourism dollars. I thought, there's nothing in there about the new exciting stuff that the school district has facilitated. So, okay, great. On to the enrollment report, which
I will do a
gives me
very
little
short,
heartburn.
I will, these are our normal,
Mhm.
monthly reports that Cattery provides for us. I'm just gonna highlight, the one I'm in right now is enrollments, students, and projected average daily membership, November 2021. And when it says November 2021, please remember this is through October, so
Mhm.
it's in the November meeting, but it's data as recent as October. Just wanna highlight, if you remember that number of enrollments that we talked about in the mobility report, that's that first column here too, where she tells us how many number of enrollments, how many MARS files we've created since the beginning of the school year. So kind of keeping that in mind of where we were at the beginning of last year, and where we are right now. Just wanting to note that we are still under just shy of 8,000 students as a projection. This is one thing that we've talked a lot about in the last 3 years since I've been here at the district, that during this particular time of the school year, historically, when enrollment reports were shared with the board, they would have showed a real high number here because we might have 8,200 kids right now. And then as the year progresses, we see students dropping off and we see that enrollment dropping off, and then we find ourselves at this low number. And it seemed, especially talking with Cattery and Member Trinka and others, that we wanted to do that proration and play it out as if what would happen at the end of the year, not just what's happening right now. So using those proration amounts that Cattery works through and looking at what may happen and transpire in the months to come before the end of the school year, we are projecting right now a little bit lower. We had a lot of conversations about budgeting this year, and we budgeted 8180 students, which was the same number we budgeted at the beginning of 21 last year. We did adjust when we realized how many non-public students we had lost and some other things, so we knew that, but we had been a little bit more optimistic than we thought in terms of where we might be. But that doesn't mean we might not see continued re-enrollment of students. So we're gonna continue to use the proration factor, but Cattery, Simone, and myself are gonna spend some time in early December deciding if we want to bring forward to the board in December a revised enrollment budget, which would mean that we'd be doing a revised budget. So that may mean that we're gonna lower our revenue estimates for fiscal year 22. We did that at this time last year. It's a difficult conversation to have, but I think we need to be realistic that that number may need to be closer to 8,000 versus 8,100. But Cattery and Simone and I, our lenses are unique enough that it really helps us to walk through it together to say, trending out, what are the things we really need to be looking at, and Cattery can put really good data points together for us. So we will most likely be coming to this committee in December with a revised and changed budget amount. But again, just wanting to kind of keep folks noted. And again, the enrollments per ADM, that's that average amount of MARS files per student. And again, we just want to share that our early childhood has the highest number, our elementaries have the lowest number, which means most of those students enroll in the beginning of the year, stay all year, and then are done. At our high school level, at our secondary level, and then at that early childhood level, we see on average 2 MARS files, which means some students are moving in and out 4 or 5 times, and some are staying 1 time. So just wanting to make sure people understand the volatility of enrollment here in Duluth Public Schools. So the other report is the same numbers, but just in a different format, so I'll just not go over that unless people have any questions, and we'll look forward to sharing some more information next month.
Yeah, when I looked at the, thank you for, I think it's good to remind about the proration, because that does really help us as we do budget forecasting, and allows us to, at times like this, say, we think it's time to come forward with a revised budget reflecting a lower number, because we lose more students in the second semester typically than we do in the first semester. I do not have the lenses that you and Simone and Kateri have, so I'm not even gonna pretend to play in that league. But I think that it's likely wise as we manage expectations. And also, that might filter into the discussion around ESSER dollars too, so that's wise. Any questions or feedback on that, Member Sandholm?
Yes, thank you. I guess I'm just curious about what goes into the proration factor. Is it a 3-year average, is it a 5-year average? And how do we come to that number?
Thanks, Member Sandholm, that's a great question. We actually do all three. We do a 1 year, a prior year, a 3-year, and a 5-year, and then she actually consolidates all of those averages into one average.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Anything to add, Simone? Simone?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. You've been quiet tonight. All right, the child nutrition report.
Again, some great information from Sheila Oak, just providing some statistical information, and then again, just sharing the food supply chain issues that we continue to have. And again, as we talked earlier in the meeting, that we will continue to work towards trying to fill these helper positions and try to do some more work to make sure that we can provide as much information as possible. This is our opportunity again for those that are watching to plug the application for benefits. It is still an opportunity for families to register. We do understand that this is another year of free type A lunches for all students, so you might not think it's necessary to fill out the application for benefits, but if you are so inclined to share with your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers who live in Duluth Public Schools, we do have a low amount of applications completed so far again, and this was through last month, so we're hoping we're going to see another push.
Okay, great. I had a question about this, and it's because we got an email that likely went to all staff of ISD709 looking for volunteers for the vaccine clinics. And I thought that, why can't we have volunteers for food service? Or can we?
So it will most likely get grieved.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
Thanks. All right. You don't need to say anything else.
Okay.
Okay. Transportation. Anything special in there? Anything special? I didn't see anything overly special or different, except for when I had wondering about the with cold and flu season coming up, if you're hearing any murmurings about the need to actually enforce some of the social distancing on buses.
We don't have any requirements right now. Masks are still mandated on all of our buses. That's actually a federal mandate. That's not even a recommendation or a district choice. That's still a federal mandate. We are looking at whenever we can to do additional disinfection on our school buses in the event that we see higher outbreaks. One of the things we are following and monitoring is when we see positive cases to see if they're in relation to any school bus routes. And we have not seen a high direct correlation of students on the same buses. It's mostly in the same classrooms. So that's been good news for us. I think too, one of the realities that we're gonna need to think about, and Steve Johnson and I have had some important conversations about this. Even though COVID, the disease itself, is something of a concern, the new federal mandated requirement of vaccination and testing has been something that many of our departments have been wondering how that impact is going to be, and we're going to need to communicate and talk with our groups and bargaining units to decide, when this rolls out, what could this mean? Because we have heard not just at school districts, but around, that there are folks who are gonna say, I'm not willing to go through that process, I'm also not willing to test, so I may choose not to be a part of that. And because we are an employer of over 100, we are required to follow that mandate, so we may be having to share some updated information when we find that out.
And I've looked to see if there's like a multiplier that you can use or a base percentage that you can consider for an average. And it with mandates varying so widely based on region, and it's almost impossible to predict. But it does have a much larger impact on employers who have had to mandate it up until this point. We had a national kind of crisis call today about the mandates in the health centers that we represent and the staffing shortages that it is exacerbating. So I think that it's wise to start thinking about contingency plan, like this is a contingency plan of a contingency plan of a contingency plan. I mean, I know we talked like in August about how creative can we get with transportation. And I know
this is a really real conversation, and our partner, Voyager Bus, is also a very important player in this conversation and how we may have to work together. At the very beginning of the school year and into the summer, you remember we were looking at modified potential routes based on potential bus driver shortages. We never actually hit the point of crisis of cracking, but we've been riding that line. But we've continued to do the work of that preparation of what things might look like, even though at the time it didn't look like we would have to implement. But should this new mandate, rollout, and timeline come together for us, we're probably going to need to have that conversation, which may spark looking at creativity of how we can get our students to school.
I just wonder if it's maybe time to like let PTSAs or something know that this is coming, because winter is around the corner, which this is always a scary time for transportation as it is. And then you add this on top of it, and if they could have a heads up that maybe they might have the opportunity to mobilize, and I don't know who the PTSA liaison here is, and maybe that's not the right approach, but maybe it's not, and maybe that's a contract issue, and so I might be stepping on toes here too, but I just worry about our kids in the cold.
Yeah, and one of the things that both Voyager and our teams were doing in October was ridership surveys to see, we have to put seats on all the buses for students who qualify for transportation, but then we do head counts or load counts to make sure we understand who's actually riding the bus, because sometimes, even though we've said we've condensed a lot of routes, we still have families who are choosing to bring their children to school rather than riding the bus. We did a survey this summer asking families, even though you qualify for transportation, if you're not going to use transportation because you know that the high school student has their own car and they're going to ride every day, or you're dropping them off with yourself or your neighbors, that could really help us. What it turned out was that what we had estimated and what we heard back from the survey were almost identical. So we had actually done really good estimating work. We were hoping it was going to be higher.
Right.
So we were hoping we'd find more seats on the bus, but Steve and our friends at Voyager are doing that work right now to see if we do have some load count issues that could allow for, again, some route changes or potential consolidations if we need them.
We did work with the bargaining unit as well to provide a temporary increase in wage of about 20% too. So that I think had looking at the report that they were able to hire two additional drivers. Hopefully that's having some impact on stemming the tide away and maybe helping us recruit a little bit better. But I agree, we need to make sure that our parents are ready. I have let people know through the district advisory committee that we have, but I think the PTSAs would be a great place too if we need to.
Well, and I know the DTA is doing all sorts of modifications with their short routes or whatever, high-speed routes, whatever they're called, so I don't know, it just makes me nervous, especially since it's supposed to be a snowy one. I know, knock on wood. All right, let's see. Moving on to the consent agenda, I just had a couple questions and I'll open it up to my colleagues to see if they have any questions related to anything on the consent agenda as a whole. With the job description for the early childhood supports and screening assistant, is there anything that we need to know about that one?
Not that we're aware of. I'm not sure if anyone from HR has any comment on that. We think it's just a new supports and screening assistant position, and anytime we create a new position, it has to be approved by the board.
Yes,
So.
but
no-
this
no-
isn't a modification, this isn't like a new,
Correct.
great. Member Kirby or Member Stanholm, any questions or anything you'd like to call out on the consent agenda? Piedmont and their candy bar sales, $12,000. Who had the beef jerky sales?
We had a lot of beef
Was
jerky
that-
last year.
Stowe or Laura Mack or something that had like wild beef jerky. I mean, these kids are hustling.
Yeah.
All right, well, seeing none, I know we have some follow-ups, but really wanna thank, I don't know how you guys are keeping track of all the projects that you have up in the air right now, but we certainly appreciate your time this evening, and we will adjourn the HR Finance Committee meeting of November. Thank you.